Because it's a day ending in Y, Tim Pool is producing a segment discussing the current civil war. I say current because the corporate press is already saying, in many circumstances, it's here. We just don't want to recognize it. We've had the Washington Post write about it because a CIA expert who tracks civil war says, we're in it, baby. We've got The Guardian writing last month, the second civil war has already begun. We just don't want to see it. And now we have many more stories. A billionaire saying this bit of legislation proves civil war is coming. We have Rep. Kinzinger warning civil war may be coming, now upping the ante and saying targeted assassinations are coming if a civil war breaks out. Yo, that's crazy. It's crazy, but man, it's scary. I hope nothing like that happens. I hope everybody calms down. But I've been talking about this for several years. We also have Justice Sotomayor, Supreme Court Justice, saying that we may be facing a national crisis over hyperpolarization. And I got to tell you, man, nothing exemplifies this better than the hashtag I'm still with her, Hillary Clinton support on Twitter, and the articles about why they were correct to call half the country deplorables, and an article from Joe Walsh in Salon, where he completely lies, or at least is wrong about what's actually happening in this country, claiming that the right in this country has become hyperpolarized and radicalized. But the data shows that's not true. And polling shows that independent voters are more likely to align with Republicans. I think the data from Pew shows that hyperpolarization is happening mostly as an effect of the corporate press and the left in this country. Which is why it's important to point out that the corporate press are coming out saying a civil war is coming. They are riling up their cult-like base. And it may result in something catastrophic. Or, let's just be real, they might be right. In fact, I think they are. Whenever I talk about civil war, invariably I get these critics saying, oh, here comes Tim, an accelerationist. I had establishment left Democrat personality types and activists saying that I was calling for acceleration by simply pointing out that I thought we were on track for a civil war. So let me just make a few points before I read you this news. In 2018, when I said I fear we were on track for a civil war in this country because of street violence, would you have believed me if I were to tell you that on January 6th, there would be a riot at the Capitol, that people believed the election was stolen and wanted to shut down the electoral vote process? Would you believe me if I said that Democrats and establishment uniparty Republicans would form a committee to spy on Americans and subpoena the former presidential administration, threatening to imprison them? That's all happening. Not to mention, there have been prominent Trump supporters, or prominent to varying degrees, well-known activists, who have been killed. Notably, that guy up in Portland, Aaron Danielson, took two to the chest because an Antifa Black Lives Matter guy shot him. Or how about the guy who showed up to the ICE facility and tried firebombing it? I say it this way. I get people who come up to me and they say, where's that civil war you were talking about, Tim? You talk about it so often. And then I just respond, on January 6th, several hundred to maybe 1,000 Trump supporters went to the Capitol, for which there was a riot, fighting with police, where they stormed in the main tunnel entrance. Now, you know the story. Obviously, my position on January 6th is that it was not an insurrection, but it's certainly indicative of us getting close to one. There was a deadly riot. Deadly for the Trump supporters, mind you. And a lot of people wandered in cluelessly because the police opened the doors. That's all true. But I'm not saying that was the sign of the start. Certainly some in corporate press are. Just another grain of sand in the heap. While you or many others may not believe it was all that extreme, I certainly think it was very, very bad. It's just another grain of sand in that heap. Now, for all those naysayers who told me I was wrong, here we are with Adam Kinzinger. He's a Republican, but he's an anti-Trump Republican the Democrats seem to love. He's on the January 6th committee, and he's warning now that he fears civil war is very possible. And he's warning now, as of today at noon, it's being reported that he's warning of targeted assassinations. I don't know where this goes or how it escalates. All I can see is that when you read this article from Joe Walsh, you will truly understand why I believe there is no turning back and why I've been scared. I've said bullish on civil war. That doesn't mean I want it to happen. It means I predict it's going to escalate. I hope it doesn't. I'd prefer to be bearish and see that market come down. We don't want conflict. We don't want China to win on the global stage. This is where we're going. But enough ranting. Let me actually read for you what they're saying about this. And then I'll show you the comments from Joe Walsh, supposedly a conservative. But when you read what he's saying, you realize these people are primed for polarization and conflict. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member. All of the work we do, our journalists reporting on the news, these videos, it is primarily funded by your memberships. Your memberships keep the lights on, allow us to do more work, allow us to expand. And we're looking to build culture, TV shows, movies, very inspired by the Daily Wire and the things they're doing. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive members-only podcasts from all of our shows, notably the Timcast IRL podcast, Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. We had Nick Searcy of FX's Justified on last night talking about his film Gosnell. You really want to check that one out, but it's not for the faint-hearted. It's very gruesome stuff. But we really do appreciate your support. So don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. It really is the best way to help. Let's read this story from Newsweek. They report, if a civil war breaks out in the U.S., Representative Adam Kinzinger believes it won't be reminiscent of the 19th century Civil War because it'll take the form of targeted assassinations, not against the state. Once an unthinkable theory, growing political divisions have fueled speculation that a civil war could be looming. While some see it as inevitable, others have pushed for people to resist the possibility. And Kinzinger told The View on February 10th that it's not too far of a bridge to believe another civil war could happen in the U.S. However, if it does occur, he warned that it wouldn't take the same shape as it did in 1861. A man after my own heart in so many ways. Now, certainly I am no fan of Kinzinger. I believe the January 6th committee is exacerbating the problem. Certainly there are people who think that my conversations are exacerbating the problem, which is one of the reasons I believe it may be inevitable. I'm not going to back down. I want to call this stuff out. I want to call out what I view as wrong. I imagine so does Adam Kinzinger. But I think he's abusing his authority and his power on the January 6th committee. So perhaps if both principal factions view the other as the inherent evil that must be stopped, it's all but inevitable, isn't it? Targeted assassinations, violence. That's what a 21st and 20th century civil war is. We're identifying now by our race, by our ethnic group. We're separating ourselves, and we live in different realities. He is oh so right. He really is. He really is. And I got to stress again, I'm going to read for you this Joe Walsh article so you can understand it, but I want to give you this news first. Kinzinger had previously stated, we have to recognize the possibility of a civil war. This is Axios similarly reporting with what Newsweek said, but he had previously said that we would be naive not to believe it's possible. And here we are. We also have Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is, my understanding, he's a billionaire, founder of Bridgewater, the world's biggest hedge fund, and he's warning that moderates would lose seats while extremists and populists in both parties will gain them in the upcoming election. Hopefully, but not certainly, we will get through this election with the election rules prevailing without a fight over them. But Ray Dalio thinks we're headed for a civil war, and a shocking fact about new legislation shows why. They're going to say a record-breaking 440 plus bills with provisions that restrict voting access were introduced in 49 states in 2021. The right looks at what the left is doing with their security stripping, as it were, of voting in this country. The left calls it voting rights. The right calls it the removal of security, and both sides completely disagree. Now, I happen to agree that we need stricter rules on voting. We need there to be security. It should not be that you walk by a wishing well and flick in a coin without thinking twice. There should be some responsibility involved. But we should make sure people have access to voting. Sort of middle of the road, but probably siding more with the Republicans on this one. But it doesn't matter. My opinion on these things is not relevant to the fact that you have two principal factions at odds with each other. Which brings me to The Guardian. January 4th, 2022. The next U.S. Civil War is already here. We just refuse to see it. We're planning on having Stephen Marsh on Timcast IRL to talk all about this because I think his perspective is important, whether we agree or not. Seems like he's on the other side of things, is the way I see it, which would be an interesting conversation. Why? We disagree, yet principally, we agree a civil war is here. He writes, the right has recognized the system is in collapse, and it has a plan: violence and solidarity with treasonous far-right factions. Nobody wants what's coming, so nobody wants to see what's coming. I agree, man. On the eve of the first Civil War, the most intelligent, the most informed, the most dedicated people in the U.S. could not see it coming. Even when Confederate soldiers began their bombardment of Fort Sumter, nobody believed that conflict was inevitable. The North was so unprepared for war, they had no weapons. In Washington, in the winter of 1861, Henry Adams, the grandson of John Quincy Adams, declared that not one man in America wanted the Civil War or expected or intended it. South Carolina Senator James Chestnut, who did more than most to bring on the advent of the catastrophe, promised to drink all the blood spilled in the entire conflict. The common wisdom at the time was that he would have to drink not a thimble. The United States today is once again headed for civil war, and once again, it cannot bear to face it. The political problems are both structural and immediate. The crisis both long-standing and accelerating. The American political system has become so overwhelmed by anger that even the most basic tasks of government are increasingly impossible. The legal system grows less legitimate by the day. Trust in government at all levels is in free fall, or like Congress, with approval ratings hovering around 20%, cannot fall any lower. Right now, elective sheriffs openly promote resistance to federal authority. Right now, militias train and arm themselves in preparation for the fall of the republic. Right now, doctrines of radical, unachievable, messianic freedom spread across the internet and talk radio, on cable television, in the malls. The consequences of the breakdown of the American system is only now beginning to be felt. January 6th wasn't a wake-up call. It was a rallying cry. The Capitol Police have seen threats against members of Congress increase by 107%. Fred Upton, Republican representative from Michigan, recently shared a message he had received. I'm not going to read it. It's brutal. Effectively a threat. And it's not just politicians, but anyone involved in the running of the electoral system. Death threats have become a standard aspect of the work life of the election supervisors. Under such conditions, party politics have become mostly a distraction. The parties and the people in the parties no longer matter much, one way or another. Blaming one side or the other offers a perverse species of hope. If only more moderate Republicans were in office, if only bipartisanship could be restored to what it was. Such hopes are not only reckless, but irresponsible. The problem is not who is in power, but the structures of power. The U.S. has burned before: the Vietnam War, civil rights protest, assassinations of JFK and MLK, Watergate. All were national catastrophes, which remain in living memory. But the U.S. has never faced an institutional crisis quite like the one it's facing now. Trust in the institutions was much higher before the 60s. The Civil Rights Act had the broad support of both parties. JFK's murder was mourned collectively as a national tragedy. You could not make one of those statements today with any confidence. Two things are happening at the same time. Most of the American right have abandoned faith in government as such. Their politics is increasingly the politics of the gun. The American left is slower on the uptake, but they are starting to figure out the system which they gave the name of democracy is less deserving of the name every year. I don't completely agree with his perspective. It seems like he's very opposed to the right. He talks about white supremacists are not a marginal force. They're in the institutions. I think it's patently absurd, to be completely honest, because most people don't hold those views, unless, of course, your definition of white supremacist is from the woke perspective. But then again, we've seen critical race theory in all of our institutions. In this, I agree with Stephen Marsh. Am I saying his name wrong? I'm going to make sure I get it right. Stephen Marsh. The right views the left as being inside these institutions, and the left views the far right, the white supremacists, as being in these institutions. Thus, it doesn't matter who's right. And that's why I think it's silly I'm not arguing with this guy. I mean, we'll debate those points, but fundamentally, I agree with him. Both sides think the other side is infiltrated and has taken over. I think I can prove this guy wrong about the right. I brought data with me in this segment. But if all that matters at the end of the day are that two large groups of people blame each other, well, then you're going to get conflict. It doesn't matter who is right. It matters that both sides refuse to be wrong. The New York Times. Is civil war coming to America? Dispatches from Stephen Marsh How to Stop Them from Barbara F. Walter. They talk about this, I believe it's Barbara Walter. You've got 3 retired generals in the U.S. saying there could be a breakdown in 2024. You've got this CIA expert saying the U.S. is on track for a civil war. And you know what? I just love how many people refuse to acknowledge it and tell me I've been wrong for 4 years now. The unfortunate privilege of being ahead of the market, I suppose. It's not that I believe it's, in 2018, I said I thought we were on track for one because of the escalation, the hyperpolarization. But I could be wrong. Maybe it all stops here. I don't know if I believe that at this point. I don't know. I don't know. But I can tell you, man, here's a story from the Brookings Institute. Is the U.S. headed for civil war? A 2021 national survey by John Zogby found a plurality of Americans, 46%, believed a future civil war was likely. 43, unlikely. 11, not sure. Young people were more likely to believe, 53%, than older ones, 31. What you need to understand, as the older generation, let's just say ages out, leaving the marketplace, leaving politics, younger people who are more likely to be polarized or at the very least believe we're on track will be taking their place. That suggests to me that we're heading in that direction. The latest news we have is Justice Sotomayor saying a partisan divide could affect the perception of the Supreme Court. Great headline, CNN. In reality, she said she was concerned the country might be in crisis because of polarization, and it would affect the court. Saying the country might be in crisis because of polarization, that coming from a Supreme Court justice, I think, is much more, well, I'll say you're burying the lead here. But I think I can give you an example of an article that really explains the severity and the extremity of what we're to see. You may think, you may be hopeful that this country can pull itself together. I'm sorry, I'm not that optimistic. But hold on. I'm not pessimistic in terms of our prospects as Americans as to what the future holds. I believe liberty and freedom will win. I just believe we may be headed for some very serious conflict, but ultimately, the night is always darkest before the dawn. And even if there is a civil war or conflict, I believe freedom will win out, as it often does. Joe Walsh on what the left doesn't get. Trump world would happily burn this country to the ground. Wait till you see, till you hear what this man has to say about the right in this country. And then maybe you'll understand. Walsh writes, this is Chauncey DeVega. Joe Walsh talking with Joe Walsh. The Republican Party's assault on American democracy is an imminent existential crisis. The disaster was long in the making. For at least 5 decades, the Republican Party and the larger conservative movement have moved farther and farther to the right, becoming increasingly anti-democratic and detached from reality. That's fundamentally not true, but he cites Salon as his evidence. Now, I'm not going to cite a biased publication to give you evidence. I'm going to rebut this by showing you hard data from Pew Research. I'd love to give you more. Pew is what I have. He goes on to say the Republican Party embraced white supremacy and white backlash in the 60s. He says the Republicans engaged in the Southern strategy. All of this is just fundamentally not true. Ultimately, the Republican Party's embrace of fascism is a story about how respectable establishment conservatives have made bargains and agreements with fringe factions to hold power. Ultimately, it's just a lie. He goes on to say he had a long conversation with former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh, who was a staunch conservative. His new podcast, White Flag with Joe Walsh, where he surrenders the urge to fight and strives to find a path to unite, not divide. But when he comes out and says that they would happily, Trump world, burn the country to the ground, it's almost like they're ignoring Joe Walsh and this writer, Chauncey, that Black Lives Matter caused $2 billion in damage in widespread riots, the worst riots we've seen in decades, in generations. But it didn't matter, I suppose. These people are detached from reality. Think I'm wrong? I bring you now to the hard data. What we have here is Pew Research data. And it's been measured out, thanks to The Economist. In 1994, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is far left and 10 is far right, Republicans sat at a 6, with Democrats at a 5, the median. The median Democrat was a 5, centrist, middle of the road. Republicans were center-right at about a 6. By 2004, the country had shifted somewhat left-leaning. Democrats were now a 4, and Republicans were just a little bit to the left of a 5, meaning it was leaning right in the 90s, leaned a little bit center-left in the 2000s. As of 2017, the Republicans are at 6.5, and the Democrats are at 2. Now, let me give you an easier way to show the shift. This is this is a vertical data set showing 1994 to 2017. The shift. Republicans have moved over to the right by 0.5. That's not radicalization. That's not far right. That is not rejecting reality. That's actually just moving slightly to the right. But the Democrats, who are centrists, are now far left, moving over to a 2. You can see the visualization here for those that are listening. The simple way to put it is the left has jumped 3 whole points and the right has jumped 0.5 since 1994. Since 2004, the left has jumped 2 points and the right has jumped 1.5. Any way you cut it, the Republican Party has not gone far right relative to where they've been since the 90s, 30 years. So when they come out and they say that the right is radicalized and we have to stop them, what you're really seeing, the left is radicalized. The Democrats have radicalized. And you know what? I can sit here and show you the data and say it's not about political party because I'm no fan of uniparty Republicans and I'm not a fan of a lot of conservative policies. I'm a bit of a centrist. When I show you the hard data, they reject it. So the point is, we can sit here as those seeking truth, seeking to understand, and we can see the left is not doing that. And I can show you easy examples. Do you guys watch the Timcast IRL podcast? I've made a point several times in these videos and in the Timcast IRL podcast that I believe the Second Amendment protects the rights of individuals to own nuclear arms. I was then asked by Seamus Coughlin of Freedom Tunes on the show if that meant biological arms as well, and I said yes. Now, I'm sure many of you right there are saying, are you nuts, Tim? You want people to have these weapons? I'm certainly not saying that. What I'm saying is, when the Constitution was crafted, they wrote a Second Amendment that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The reasoning is irrelevant. It says that, which means legally, nuclear arms are arms. Biological arms are arms. And I want you to understand that at the time of the Founding Fathers, they believed in privateers, corsairs, privately owned warships. There were people, private citizens, who owned ships capable of decimating an entire port-side city. So people say, certainly the Founding Fathers wouldn't have imagined that someone could have a weapon that could blow up a city. What are you talking about? They hired those people. They issued letters of marque. They would sign a letter of marque, the crown, and they would have ships go out, privateers, privately owned ships, to bombard other ships and coastal towns to disrupt supply lines. I'm not saying it was a good thing. I'm not saying people should have this right. But let me show you this. Now, I know some people don't like it when I talk about issues of myself, and for that I apologize, but I think this is a great example, and it's something I can speak to. Look at that, Tim Pool's trending again. For that reason, Right Wing Watch posts a clip that is deceptively edited. And they say, after Rep. Thomas Massie asserted that American citizens must possess weapons powerful enough to overthrow the government should 30 or 40% agree, Tim Pool declared the Second Amendment protects the individual right to own nuclear and biological weapons. Because it does. And I then immediately go on to say, because Ian Crossland then says, okay, you're not saying people should have these weapons. Principally, you're saying that the Constitution grants that right. I said, yeah, people, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I'm not advocating for ownership of nuclear weapons. I've said this in numerous episodes of the show. What I've said is, you need to amend the Constitution. In this particular clip, I immediately say it shouldn't be hard to change. I said previously, we get a convention of states, we amend this, and I think everyone would agree. I don't think people want individual citizens to have nuclear weapons. What did Right Wing Watch do? They cut the video so you can't tell what I was actually saying. Because whether it's to cause war or not, this is the nature of what political advocacy is. Right-wing watch is a hammer looking for nails. They exist only to make people freak out and to make people vote Democrat. So if they can deceptively edit a video so that it ends before the conversation is done and you don't hear the full context, they'll do it. It makes them money. It results in me trending and people responding with, I can't believe Tim Pool would say something so absurd that people have a right to own nuclear weapons, as if I'm advocating for it. No, I'm simply saying we should have an amendment to the Constitution. Some people catch this. Some people who watched the show responded and said, he literally said he's not advocating for it. He's saying we need to amend the Constitution. That's why we allow amendments. The founding fathers couldn't foresee a lot of things. So we said we will have constitutional amendments. That means if we've come to the point where weapons, arms are too powerful, we amend the Constitution. But we cannot, as a culture, just arbitrarily decide that our founding documents are meaningless, because then the basis of the Constitution itself is meaningless. If you believe people don't have the right to have these weapons, we need only clarify in the Constitution. We amend it. A new amendment, what would that put us at, 28? The right to keep and bear arms shall be limited, and people shall not have the right to weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction are described as any weapon capable of causing damage to at least, 100 square feet or something like that. Like, we have to define these things because right now it just says you can have these weapons, but they don't care for the truth. They care for the buzz content. Let me play for this clip just a little bit so you can see how quickly it ends. A nuclear warhead.
But not a delivery device?
Oh, all of it. I think.
Well, Tim, what about biological weapons?
Absolutely. All of it. All of it.
It
ends right as I'm about to say something else. What I was going to say is that doesn't mean people should have these weapons. And I think it would be very easy to change the Constitution. Now, why did Right Wing Watch lie? As I explained, hyperpolarization is the only thing they have to offer. And now we have this from the Washington Post. Hillary Clinton's deplorable speech shocked voters 5 years ago, but some feel it was prescient. Basket of deplorables. This is actually from August 31st, 2021. But I bring it up because hashtag I'm still with her was trending. So this was, 6 months ago. Hillary Clinton said those 3 words in the final months of her 2016 presidential campaign, making rhetorical and political history. They go on to say, Clinton probably didn't lose the White House because of her figure of speech, but it's a lesson how politicians make unforced errors, blah, blah, blah. In a nation where half the country thinks the other half is wrong and possibly even deplorable, it's about how we talk with each other. I'm still with her was trending. I take a look at these articles. I take a look at this one from investors.com. It's official. Democrats are the extremists today. Published October 12th, 2017, when that Pew research came out showing that the Republican right didn't move that far to the right, but the left moved far left. Yeah, we talked a lot about this. This is one of the reasons I said I felt civil war was coming. One of those reasons is that the left is in a cult where they think the right is far right, but the data clearly shows the inverse, that they're far left. They're being shown fake videos like Right Wing Watch, deceptively editing a video, cutting out the full context where I talked about amending the Constitution. And in that particular conversation, I said, maybe there should be, you should abolish the NFA and the ATF. People should have the same weapons police have. I thought that was an interesting idea that Thomas Massey brought up, but never did I advocate for individuals owning nuclear weapons. They're just lying to people. Those lies drive the left into a psychotic fit of rage. I can show you the full context. January 6th, violent rioters fought with cops and forced their way into the tunnel entrance. On the other side of the building, police opened doors for the Magamimas, as they call them, people who walked around confused. Cops waved people in, and one officer even said, I don't agree with it, but I respect it. Many officers took selfies with people. Those people are not the same as those who fought with cops. That's the truth. You can watch the videos for yourself. But why would the Young Turks lie about that? They did. They made a whole video lying about what really happened to insult me. The left is in a cult. They're hyper-radicalized. The right and independent voters tend to agree. So I can simplify it very much for you. If the independent voter base in this country 2-1 leans with Republicans, and Republicans, disagree with the establishment perspective, and data shows the Republicans are not far right, it stands to reason the outgroup is actually the Democrat voter base that believes the lies. And they are who will be leading us into hard conflict. Why? Republicans don't do anything. The January 6th committee has 2 Republicans, never Trumpers, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. They're okay abusing their power. Good, important to call them out. But the entirety of this committee, mostly Democrats, they're overtly abusing their power, targeting Donald Trump. Well, guess what? Why are they doing it? They're seeking to stop Trump from running for re-election. They accused Trump of doing the same thing, abusing his power to try and stop Joe Biden before Joe Biden announced. Well, now it's the same thing with Donald Trump. We all know Donald Trump's going to run, and they're trying to disqualify him. They're actively in a lawsuit to disqualify Madison Cawthorn. They'll probably do the same thing to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. The left has become extremely radicalized. And the interesting thing about it is that the tactics they're using are the tactics they accuse the Republicans of doing. So even if the Republicans were doing it, they're engaging in the same thing. So at the very least, we can call them insurrectionists, right? They could be impeached for abusing power, right? No. Even though they accused Donald Trump of trying to smear Joe Biden, even when Joe Biden wasn't running for president, he didn't announce it. They do the same thing, but we'll never see accountability for them. They'll keep holding their breath and having a temper tantrum, accusing everyone else of doing wrong while they do the exact same things. They lie, they cheat, they steal. And it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter my opinion on them. Everything I've said. What matters? Both sides agree. The other side has gone nuts. So I think it's basically inevitable. I certainly hope not. I hope you're paying attention. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.